Good morning and welcome again, and welcome to all of our friends and families that have joined us online today. Thank you. So we're going to change gears just a little bit. I'm going to introduce myself and Amy Lyle. Myself first. So I'm Julie Hajewski. I work here at the Wiseman Center with one of our grant-funded programs called the Wisconsin Youth Health Transition Initiative. I work actually in provider education, working on training healthcare providers on transition related to healthcare. And I also work as a nurse practitioner in the UW health system in internal medicine. So kind of understand the work from both sides. So I'm going to talk a little bit about health transition, but I'm going to let Amy introduce herself and get started first with some other aspects of it.
Hey everybody, so my name is Amy Lyle. I am a social worker here at the Wiseman Center. I work in the Down syndrome clinic and also in the Autism and Developmental Disabilities clinic. And I also work in the Southern Regional Center for Children and Youth with Special Healthcare Needs. And so what this means is I talk to families all day, every day. It's the passion in my life, listening to you all and learning from you all about what works and what doesn't in our system. And we're going to be talking about transition today, and it really is just so beautiful to connect with Dr. Hartley and Dr. Christensen's work, because a lot of what we're going to talk about is related to that. Here's you, Julie. So we are talking about transition planning today, and I am going to be taking a little bit more broad view, and Julie is going to hone in on health transition and related aspects of that particularly. And so when we think about transition, I think a lot of times we go right to those health aspects, decision making, leaving high school, and employment. And really, it's important to hone in on those aspects, but they aren't the only aspects that we can be thinking about in terms of thinking about a full life. I had this as my landing slide as I was building this presentation, and it just brought such joy. So I just left it in there for us all to appreciate. What does life look like? What do we want the lives to look like for any of our family members, especially our family members with Down syndrome? And how do we imagine it for them? And how do they imagine it for themselves as well? I am really excited to point you to this resource, which exists in a couple of different places, and I have links to them. But Family Voices of Wisconsin, which is a family-led, family-driven advocacy organization, partnered with the Wisconsin Integrated Transition Planning Project, or WETIP, here at Wiseman Center to develop a set of fact sheets that really take this broad view, this broad look at transition for families who have a family member with a disability. And what they're really focusing in on is integrated transition planning. And what they describe integrated transition planning is a path to living a full, meaningful, and connected life as a member of the community. And I think that really connects so nicely with the research that was presented this morning about how that has implications for health impacts, employment, all of those other pieces that we're thinking about for the family members we have with Down syndrome. And so when we start thinking about transition planning, I know a lot of times when you have a smaller or younger child is like, oh, I don't need to think about this. I have years and years ahead of me. And what we have learned from families that we've spoken to is that starting as early as possible is what is advised. And I think thinking about transition can be overwhelming for families. There are so many different aspects. But what we're going to talk about is picking one little piece and starting there and viewing it as something that happens over kind of a lot of years in terms of planning for the future. And what Family Voices and the WeTip project advise is taking a minute to dream with your child about their best life as an adult. And what do you imagine for that life? And when you have that picture in your head, that is going to drive the advocacy for your child in terms of making sure that they get the services and supports that they're going to need as part of their transition planning to live this full and beautiful life. And so we're thinking broadly about the future, right? We're thinking not only about health, but we're talking about leisure activities like you were talking about, Dr. Hartley. We're thinking about culture. We're thinking about lifelong learning, just like all of us take on learning tasks as part of our leisure learning. And we know that that helps our brains as well. We're thinking about friends. We're thinking about employment, housing, faith, and more. And right when we're starting to feel overwhelmed about this is so much, I feel like I cannot take all of this on at one time, they give really great direction about where do I begin? Well, we begin with what makes our family member, our loved one, the person we care about with Down syndrome, what makes them happy? And that can start, at a very young age. Obviously, we're paying attention to what our children enjoy doing, what they seem to gravitate towards. And Family Voices really recommends talking with friends, and whether that's your family friends or the friends of your child, family, teachers, and thinking about what makes a good day. And that can change over time, right? And obviously it does for all of us. You also can ask for support in this as well. You are not in this transition piece alone. I know the heavy lifting definitely falls to families, and we hear that from families, but I would really encourage you to start talking to children's long-term support waiver case managers, service coordinators, IRIS coordinators, early about your thinking about the future for your child. I used to be a CLTS or a service coordinator in the KID system, and I really, in retrospect, wish that I had engaged more families and talk about transition years and years and years earlier than we were encouraged to. And then we also want to emphasize that you do have time. So no matter where you all are in this journey, whether you have a 3-year-old or a 13-year-old or a 23-year-old, there is time to make some of these changes or kind of be thinking in this kind of way, especially geared towards employment opportunities and leisure and things like that we were hearing about that can have such positive impacts on brain health and overall health. One of the fact sheets gets deeper into these puzzle pieces of transition. And I think it's really helpful. They give really actionable ideas for how to look at these different pieces, including culture and arts as part of what we want to think about in transition planning, including civic engagement, thinking about voting, thinking about how do I want to support my loved one being involved in their civic engagement. They're talking about spirituality and faith, relationships and sexuality. So lots and lots of aspects. In terms of the health risks, we heard from Dr. Hartley and from Dr. Christensen, the Christian, that we all need connection, right? So this applies to all of us, not just our loved ones with Down syndrome. Many of us, I'm sure, in the room have loved ones with dementia or other kinds of disease. And as family members and caregivers, it's very important to make sure that you are having connections as well and having opportunities for to take care of yourself, but also just engage socially in a way that's important for you. And we know that in the general population that the health risks of loneliness and social isolation increase that risk of Alzheimer's. This is a really lovely chapter that I found that focused on friendship. This is out of the Handbook of Positive Psychology and Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. And the chapter was focused on friendship, relationships, inclusion, and social well-being by Eisenman, Friedman, and Kafka. And they talk about the role that caregivers, family members, support individuals can have in supporting social connection and friendship for individuals with disabilities. And I really loved the way that they framed this, that the role of the supporter is to support access to other people, right, with and without disabilities, who can share in the experiences of companionship, commitment, and caring. So pieces of relationships that we all want. And that was impactful for me in reading that. They also emphasize making sure to establish helping your loved ones with Down syndrome, which I know you all do, establish identities that don't pathologize disability, right? We acknowledge that disability is a beautiful part, a natural part of the human condition. And we want to make sure that the relationships that your loved ones are having are also holding that value. And they also emphasize that disability communities that value disability identity also represent really important context, which is fantastic because I think about all of the wonderful organizations we have here in Wisconsin that are celebrating Down syndrome, and the strength of the Down syndrome community is just this natural piece that is going to help continue to support your loved ones. They also really talked about the importance of, and not in addition to friendships, boyfriends and girlfriends, dating, if that is something that is of interest to your family member. There's a fantastic book that I know a lot of you are familiar with, written by Terry Cowenhoven, called Boyfriends and Girlfriends. I know you probably know that she is the parent of an adult daughter with Down syndrome and also a fantastic sexuality educator. That's a really great place to go for information about how to support those kinds of relationships. And I also found a really nice resource that's linked as well from Advocate General, has an adult Down syndrome clinic in Illinois. They have a lot of resources that are developed by the self-advocates in their clinic. And there was a really nice one about planning a date. And I thought it was really helpful. I thought my own kids could really benefit from it as well. Actually, I could have benefited from it. It really lays out all of the aspects of who's going to do what and how does this work in a really beautiful format. So that's linked as well to that website. And lastly, just want to leave you with some actionable kind of ideas for supporting meaningful social connection in transition and beyond and before. So this includes including social relationships and friendships in IEP goals in general, but especially in transition IEP goals. And those can be incorporated into things like volunteering, job experiences, exploring of hobbies, just making sure that we're really talking about those social relationships as a part of that employment, as a part of that volunteering. Explore the great programs that you already know about that are lifespan, right? So we're so lucky to have Gigi's, we're so lucky to have DSAW and all of the programming here in Wisconsin that has really great supports for developing friendships and social relationships. I also encourage you to pick one area of the Family Voices Transition Puzzle resource list, explore, and just have fun with it. So whether that's culture and the arts or spirituality and faith, whatever your loved one might be interested in, you can start there. And just want to leave you, I know we had Dr. Brian Scotko here a few years ago to talk about this connection with health. It also just relates so strongly back to the research that we heard this morning. Dr. Scotko has a website called Down Syndrome Brain Train. He has free downloadable resource guides, and this is one page of the SMART formula that gives some really actionable things that we can all do to support brain health and try to prevent cognitive decline and try to help prevent Alzheimer's. And the page that I chose to share with you all is the one that focuses on socialization and social connection, especially given the research that we heard this morning. I'm realizing how much more important than I even anticipated it is. What's really nice is that he breaks it down. He shares the research that this was based on, this recommendation, and it's things like take 5 minutes to have meaningful conversation each day. Ask open-ended questions of your loved one with Down syndrome. Help identify 2 core friends and video chat twice a week. I know that's easier said than done. It makes it sound really easy, but it is something that would be evidence-based and something that would kind of get at how do I continue to help my loved one build those social relationships and keep them strong and keep them going and provide that support. He also recommends with the same 1 to 2 friends, scheduling one-on-one time in person 2 times a month. Also something that is like, how do I begin doing that? I know for me in my life, if I have to get together with somebody and compare schedules every single time we do something, it's just not going to happen. So even thinking okay, 6 months out, we're going to start this. I'm going to get with another family and we're going to put some dates on the calendar, and then we don't even have to think about it. It's just going to be something that happens. Of course, if we have to cancel, that's okay. But then there's not this stress of having to try to schedule it all the time. That seems to work well from families, from what I've heard too. And then also thinking about rules for electronics in your house is what he recommends. But these are just 5, or 4 actually, actionable things that you can do to help continue to strengthen social relationships. And now I'm going to turn it over to Julie to talk more specifically about health and decision making and other aspects of transition.
All right, so we're going to push just a little bit more into that healthcare transition. We titled this the fast lane because we have a pretty short amount of time to try and give you some good content, some good places to start or continue your transition journey. And so that was really my goal this morning is, there are 2 and 3 day talks that are done in the healthcare world about transition alone. So I'm just going to give you I wanted to give you 3 tangible places to go and look at some resources and to figure out where you're at in your healthcare journey and what the next steps might be for you and your family. Okay. So again, I come from that Health Transition Wisconsin, and our goal is that we help ensure high quality, developmentally appropriate healthcare services available uninterrupted for every youth, but especially our youth with special healthcare needs as they move from adolescence to adulthood. And I think we're all really familiar. It's just really that process of moving from a child-centered care model to an adult model. And I always remind everyone this has to happen for all of our neurotypical kiddos. It happens for our children and youth and adults with disabilities also. And it happens whether you move from a provider in pediatrics to internal medicine, or if you stay with a family practice provider for lifespan. There are still changes that happen in the way that you seek healthcare and the way that your care is delivered that is helpful for families to understand to make that transition go more smoothly. This is a great resource from Got Transition, which is a national partner for our Wisconsin Youth Health Transition Initiative. And I have divvied this up onto 2 slides. It's a beautiful 1-page handout of what might you think about starting when. Now, sometimes when I show this slide to families, they go, oh my gosh, we're 17 and we haven't done all of that. And I go, it's okay. There's a lot of overlap and you can start where you're at. You can look back and see what are some of the things that maybe we can go back and make sure we recap. I think what's really important on this slide, age 12 to 13. So kind of getting back at that piece that Amy had said that, we've learned over the years in caring with families sooner. I myself have a couple of kiddos at home. My 11-year-old has Down syndrome. I give this example when I give this talk, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. Mikey has thyroid condition. He takes levothyroxine every day. From the time he was little, every day when we do his thyroid medicine, as I offer it, I say, hey, Mikey, this is your thyroid medicine. Remember, your thyroid in your neck doesn't do its job. He's 11 now. And when we see our endocrinologist on a video visit, he waves and he says, and I said, that's right. We're talking about your medicine for your thyroid today. So those connections are happening as he grows older. And that's just ways that we can think about it. So there are lots of great ideas here of ways to introduce transition. You have to pick what works in your family, what works with your schedule. This second slide talks a little bit about that 18 to 25 age, because we don't all magically become adults at 18. We know that, right? The law might say that we are technically an adult, but the reality is it's a process. So that's a great resource, 1 page, where to start, where are we at on this? What are some tasks that we can tackle? I want to go back to that regional center that Amy told you she comes from, because they are also have a great opportunity that I think is really helpful for families who are looking at their healthcare transition. We are so fortunate to have the Southern Regional Center here in the Wiseman Center. And the director for the Wiseman Center, Tim Markle, is one of my partners on the Youth Health Transition Initiative and works with me. And he does this great thing So this is on the Wiseman Center website. You'll see that red arrow there on the right. If you have an interest in learning about opportunities for transition work for your family in a way that maybe you can achieve it in painless and social opportunities out in our community with our organizations, I want you to get on Tim's listserv. That email address there on the right, you send him an email and say, I'd love to be on your listserv. Tim sends out a weekly roundup, he calls it. Every once in a while, if he's really excited about something, he sends out 2 roundups. But it is an amazing cultivated list of activities that are happening in our surrounding communities and counties on our regional center basis of things that are happening every week, every day. Everything from Transition Talk Tuesdays, which is a school-based, IEP-based transition work that he does with different districts and different schools, down to one other activity that's on my next slide that I want to tell you about. This is a great workshop opportunity for families who are interested in kind of delving into that healthcare transition journey. The way that you find out about where you might find one of these workshops is through our regional center, and they always come through on that listserv. The beauty of the virtual world these days is we used to say, okay, you could only go to one in the Southern Regional Center. Now all of our Wisconsin regional centers are hosting these as a virtual workshop. So our friends and families here in the Dane County area has access to the entire state. If they're having one in Wausau next Tuesday night, you can sign up virtually and attend. And they're a 60 to 90 minute, depending on the structure and who's providing them, but they're typically 90 minutes. And we're hoping to see some of these happen in person, but right now they're all virtually. It comes with a workbook. That workbook is available as a PDF for families to be able to print out ahead of time. And it is a step-by-step process in which you go through and talk about your family, your loved one with Down syndrome, and what it looks like for your family to work through healthcare transition. It focuses on these 8 areas, talking about different strategies for helping you find resources for your family for each one of these. Really great workshop, all led by individuals that have training in working with individuals and their families with disability. And many, many, many of our partners and providers have family members with disabilities to make it a real experience for what are the real challenges families are facing and how can we help you work through them. So a great workshop that I want you all to know about. I mentioned gottransition.org. This is a wonderful resource for families. And there's one specific tool that I think can be really helpful. Again, it's looking at that big picture of where are we at in our transition journey and what are our needs as a family. And the one thing that I always direct families to, this is a huge website, by the way, lots and lots of information, all the way from extensive provider education for implementing transition in your clinics down to families. There is a wonderful quiz for families, like that's the main page, click this button, where are we at? But I encourage families to simply go to their little looking glass in the corner and put in the family toolkit. And it's going to bring you to this document. It's I believe it's 23 pages. It's a PDF you can print out. And it really is a comprehensive beginning to end. So if you can't find time for one of those virtual workshops with our resource centers, this is a format that you can print off and start at home. And again, in a workshop kind of workbook format to say, what are our needs? What are our resources? And then you can go back to gottransition.org because they're going to have wonderful resources for each part of those different aspects of healthcare transition. One of the last tools that I wanted to leave with you is this one piece that I hear time and again when I talk and work with families with their youth with disabilities and Down syndrome is decision-making tools. What do I do at 18? How do I help ensure that my loved one gets the care that they need, but is able to be the self-advocate that they would like to live their life, right? Want to live that full life, make all the decisions that they can, but how do we do that in a way that's safe and healthy? There's lots of different opportunities around that. And I love this slide, which comes from our board for people with developmental disabilities. And it really is a nice visual depiction of all of those opportunities for what we call decision-making tools. Many of the families that I speak with are very familiar with what we call limited or full guardianship. That's something that's kind of been the status quo for a lot of years for families with loved ones with disabilities. And it really is a way in which families have felt they're able to make sure their loved one stays safe and that they manage all of the aspects of their care. But we do know over time and the research and work that's been done on it, that sometimes it doesn't enhance the self-advocacy that we'd like our loved ones to be able to have. And with that in mind, there are some other opportunities that it's helpful for people to know about, including that one called supported decision-making, which is also a wonderful opportunity in Wisconsin, legally recognized as a way in which we can allow our loved ones with Down syndrome to start making and continue making their own healthcare decisions, as well as other decisions. There is also opportunity for any type of supported decision-making, whether it's financial, housing, education, and healthcare. My work primarily on this, when I do my work in provider education, is talking to providers about what their role is with supported decision-making and these other tools. For you today as families, I want to direct you to that wonderful resource called the Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disabilities, because they have done some amazing work with families and self-advocates at exploring their decision-making opportunities. They also have toolkits available. They also do workshops. Their workshops were in person, I think are now virtual, but have some great opportunity to work through that process of what does decision-making look like for my loved one? What are their capabilities? What are their interests? And how can we leverage those? And so if you go to their website, I had that little red arrow there under resources. They also have some beautiful printed materials available that you can print off, looking at that supported decision-making and guardianship alternatives, working through what those options look like for your family. So that's my really fast run through healthcare transition. I really wanted to leave you with some really good resources that are comprehensive, where you can go and do some work on your own to figure out where you're at. Questions for Amy and I today? Yes, Teresa in the back.
This is an online question. Who can educate about SSI and how it may or may not relate to individual living with trisomy 21?
So repeat that again for me. What is SSI?
Yep. Who can educate about SSI and how it may or may not relate to an individual living with trisomy 21?
And so what is SSI and how it may or may not relate to an individual living with trisomy 21? I'm going to let my Amy expert take that question.
So it depends on the age of the person. So I would say if they are under the age of 18, contacting one of the regional centers wherever you live, they would be your contact place to talk more about Social Security income or SSI. And if the person you're speaking of is 17 and a half and older, it would be the Aging and Disability Resource Center that covers the county where you live, and or also known as the ADRC. And the ADRC has health benefits counselors that will actually help your loved one apply for Social Security income and provide that assistance and answer any questions that you have. Great question.
Others? All right, we'll let the next.
Oh, there is.
Oh, there is one more. Yeah.
So, and I'm not sure what part of the first, but the question came in is like, how does this work with nonverbal? That is an excellent question, and one so how does this work with nonverbal individuals? And I can say just from the social connection piece, we would be thinking about what are the ways in which this individual communicates best. How do they feel most comfortable communicating? Are there visual supports that we could help provide? Are they using augmentative or assistive communication as part of their communication? And if we need to look at some of those supports, if that's like, no, we don't have a lot going on right now, that's a starting place for communication, because that connects to employment and independence overall. So that's a really excellent question. And then I'll let you talk now, Julie.
I have some thoughts when we think about nonverbal, and I can this is near and dear to my heart. My 11-year-old with Down syndrome is nonverbal. And so sometimes we're talking about, I often get this question about supported decision-making. So I'm not sure if that's where our question online came from, but potentially. And I will tell you that individuals with limited verbal skills are still excellent candidates for something like supported decision-making. It does mean that families and supporters of that decision-making probably have to work a little bit harder at making sure that the needs of that individual are well represented and met. I always link this back when people say, well, nonverbal can be a challenge. And I say, listen, I have an 11-year-old and this is really easy. Do you want McDonald's or Culver's? Give me a high five. Okay, do you want a cheeseburger today or a corn dog, right? My son has much more comprehensive skills than expressive skills. He understands every single word I say to him. And so we just work hard at figuring out how to get that out of him. Sometimes we'll get out his AAC device. He can use it. He doesn't like to. He prefers his high fives. But there are ways for supporters to work with individuals. And usually when we talk about supported decision-making, supporters are people that they know very well. And so there are often times when my son says nothing and I know exactly what his answer to the question is. And that's appropriate in supported decision-making. And as long as families have that agreement on file, that is an appropriate relationship in which the supporter can help communicate those desires and wishes. If that makes sense for our question that came in. All right, I know we're running a few minutes behind schedule, so we'll let the panel start next.